I'm carrying a box of my dead brother's photos to my truck when this blonde woman starts screaming like I'm robbing a bank. "The thief! Call the cops! He's stealing!" I look at her, look at my beat-up Ford, then look at the sign that says Carter Ranch right in front of us. The irony hits me like a sledgehammer. Here I am, moving into my own property that I inherited from my brother Tom 3 months ago, and this woman thinks I'm some kind of criminal. Comment below where you're watching from, because this story will show you why you should never mess with a 60-year-old retired engineer who's got nothing but time and a really good memory for details. Susan sees me carrying those boxes to my truck, and her heart starts racing like a hummingbird's wings. Fear clouds her thinking completely, making rational thought impossible. Her mind races with only one thought: there's an intruder in my neighborhood. She starts screaming without stopping to think. "Thief! Call the cops right now! He's stealing!" The woman charging toward me looks frantic, her bleach blonde hair tangled, wearing a cardigan that's clearly been through better days. Bleach blonde hair with dark roots showing, clutching a clipboard like it's some kind of weapon, wearing a cardigan that's seen better days but trying to project authority she clearly doesn't have. "I saw you," she shouts, pointing her finger at me like she's identifying a suspect in a lineup. "You've been coming here for 3 days, taking things that don't belong to you." I stand there, looking at the woman in front of me, then at my truck, and feel a wave of anger rising inside me. But I don't let emotions control me. Years of experience as an engineer taught me that, in situations like this, only logic can help you get through. I set the box down on my tailgate, nice and slow, and pull out the small black notebook I always carry. Old habits from 30 years at Boeing, you write everything down. "Ma'am," I say, keeping my voice calm and level, "you just called the cops on a homeowner moving his own stuff. That's interesting." Her face turns red, but she doubles down. "Those could be fake papers. How do I know you're not some con artist?" By now, half the neighborhood has come out to watch the show. A few neighbors watch from their porches, some even filming the scene. The woman keeps gesturing wildly, frantic as she talks to someone on her phone, but I don't catch her name yet. "Yes, 911. There's a man in work clothes stealing from the Carter property on Pine Valley Road. He's got a truck, and he's loading it with boxes." I'm writing all of this down in my notebook, including the names I can see on mailboxes and the exact time. 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Susan notices me writing and gets even more agitated. "Now he's taking notes, probably planning his next robbery." The absurdity of the situation almost makes me laugh, but I keep my engineer's composure. Sheriff Frank Hayes arrives exactly 11 minutes later, and the first thing he does is let out a long, tired sigh when he sees Susan. "Susan, what is it this time? Call number 74? The familiarity in his voice tells me everything I need to know about this woman's relationship with local law enforcement. Hayes is a solid guy, probably mid-40s, with the patient demeanor of someone who's dealt with way too much nonsense over the years. "Sheriff Hayes," I say, extending my hand, "I'm William Carter. I inherited this ranch from my brother Tom about 3 months ago. Just finished all the legal paperwork last week and started moving some of his belongings." I show him the deed, the probate documents, my driver's license, everything neat and organized in a folder. Hayes looks it over, nods, then turns to Susan with a look that could melt steel. "Susan, this man owns this property, legally, officially, end of story." But Susan isn't having it. She crosses her arms and plants her feet like she's making some kind of last stand. "How do we know those papers are real? I've lived here for 3 years and I've never seen this man before." Hayes rubs his forehead like he's fighting off a headache. "Because I checked the county records before I drove out here, Susan, like I do every time you call, which, again, is 74 times in the past 2 years. The neighbors are starting to look uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. Some of them are drifting back toward their houses, probably realizing they're witnessing someone making a fool of themselves on a spectacular level. I'm still taking notes, and I notice something interesting. Susan's grass is easily 4 inches tall, maybe more. The HOA rules I was given when I inherited the place clearly state grass can't exceed 2.5 inches. Her car, a beat-up Honda Civic, is parked at least 8 inches over her property line onto the common area, and her mailbox has chipped paint and doesn't match the uniform appearance standards I read about in the community guidelines. If she wants to play the rules game, I'm happy to play along. "Sheriff Hayes," I say, "I appreciate you coming out. Just so you know, I'll be living here full-time starting next week. I'm looking forward to being a good neighbor and following all the community rules." I glance at Susan when I say this, and something in my tone makes her take a step back. Hayes tips his hat and heads back to his patrol car, but not before giving Susan one more warning look. Susan, I better not get another false report call. I've got real crimes to solve. As the sheriff drives away, Susan storms back toward her house, her face red with anger. She spits out, "This isn't over. I'm the HOA president and I know exactly what this community needs." The remaining neighbors scatter like leaves in the wind, leaving me standing alone by my truck with my notebook full of observations. I look at the 3 pages of notes I've already taken. A wave of frustration washes over me, but I can't help the small smile that escapes. It's one thing to be accused, it's another to know you're right. Game on, lady. Game. Susan's first violation notice arrives in my mailbox exactly 18 hours later, hand-delivered at 6:30 a.m. while I'm having my morning coffee on the porch. The envelope is marked Urgent HOA Violation in red ink, like it's some kind of emergency. Inside, there's a form claiming my grass exceeds the 2.5-inch limit by a significant margin and demanding a $75 fine within 5 business days. When I open the letter, I feel myself facing another battle. The letter states that the grass in my yard has exceeded height regulations. I sigh, take my measuring tool, and measure again. But what makes me tired is the absurdity in each of these letters. However, I cannot give up. Every small detail I record will be a weapon for me to fight. I jot down the details quickly, but I know this is just a small battle. The real fight is ahead. 2 days later, another notice arrives. Just another attempt to slow me down. This time it's about my truck being out of place. The fine is $100. I walk outside with my measuring tape, the kind I use for precision work, and check my truck's position. It's sitting squarely in the center of my driveway, exactly where it should be. But Susan's Honda Civic is definitely encroaching on the common area, just like I noted during our first encounter. I take photos with my phone, making sure to include evidence of her actual violations. Then I fill out my own violation notice, using the same form I found in the community guidelines packet. I leave my own violation notice at Susan's mailbox, letting the photos do the talking. The third notice comes on Friday, claiming I've been doing unauthorized exterior work because I fixed a loose board on my porch railing. Another $150. This is getting ridiculous, but it's also revealing Susan's strategy. She's trying to death by 1,000 paper cuts me into giving up and leaving. What she doesn't realize is that I spent 30 years dealing with Boeing's bureaucracy, which makes her little HOA game look like amateur hour. Has been documenting everything with the precision of an engineer, and if Susan wants to play rules lawyer, she picked the wrong retired professional to mess with. Saturday morning brings violation notice number 4. Noise violation for use of power tools after 6 p.m. The fine is $200. According to my records, I used my cordless drill exactly twice last week, both times well within the acceptable hours. But here's what's interesting. I also noted that Susan was outside talking loudly on her phone well past the quiet hours that start at 8 p.m. I file another violation notice against her, this time for excessive noise during designated quiet periods. I'm starting to enjoy this little game of hers. By Sunday, I've received 5 violation notices totaling $650 in fines. Susan's been busy. But I've also filed 7 violation notices against her, totaling $475, all with solid evidence. The difference is that my violations are real, and hers are complete fiction. People still stand in hallways or on porches, but their eyes have changed. They look at me as if I am an intruder, a stranger, a person who disrupts the peace in this community. But I understand that if I am not patient, I will never be able to prove myself right. Monday morning, I get a phone call from someone claiming to be the HOA treasurer, asking when I plan to pay my fines. I ask for their credentials and proof of authority. They hang up immediately. Interesting. That tells me everything I need to know about who's really running this office. Wednesday brings the knockout punch. Susan calls an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the disruptive new resident who's attacking our community values. The meeting notice goes to all 45 households, scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community center. I spend the morning preparing my presentation. Engineer's habit. When you're going to make your case, you make it with facts, evidence, and visual aids. I print photos showing the differences between our properties, my grass truck and mailbox versus hers, clear evidence of the rules she's ignored. The community center holds about 60 people, but only 32 show up for Susan's emergency meeting. She set herself up at the front with a folding table, her ever-present clipboard, and a stack of papers that looks impressive until you realize it's probably just copies of the same bogus violation notices she's been sending me. "Thank you all for coming," she begins, her voice taking on this fake formal tone like she's chairing a corporate board meeting. "We need to address the disruptive behavior of our newest resident, who seems determined to challenge every rule and regulation that makes our community the peaceful place we all love." I'm sitting in the back, my notebook open, writing down everything she says, word for word. Susan goes into this whole presentation about how I'm undermining community standards and creating a hostile environment for law-abiding residents. She waves around the violation notices she sent me like they're evidence of my wrongdoing, never mentioning that I haven't actually violated anything. When she's done with her performance, she opens the floor for questions. I stand up slowly, holding my folder of evidence. "I have a question," I say, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "Since we're talking about community standards, I'd like to know why the HOA president's grass is currently over the limit when mine isn't." The room goes dead quiet. Susan's face turns the color of a stop sign. I present my evidence simply and clearly, showing the side-by-side photos that reveal the truth about who's really violating community standards. The contrast is obvious to everyone in the room. When I'm done, the silence is deafening. Susan tries to sputter some excuse about different measuring techniques and selective enforcement, but her credibility is shot. The neighbors are looking at each other with confusion and growing suspicion. They're starting to realize that maybe they haven't been getting the full story from their HOA president. When Susan whispers to 3 neighbors after the meeting, then they all avoid eye contact with me, I know she's planning something bigger. The battle lines are drawn now, and this paper war is just the beginning. Susan's going to escalate, and I need to be ready for whatever comes next. But I've learned something important tonight. When you fight lies with truth and back it up with evidence, the truth has a way of speaking for itself. Susan's about to find out that an engineer with time on his hands can be a very dangerous opponent. Susan's door-to-door campaign begins the very next morning. I watch from my kitchen window as she makes her rounds, clipboard in hand, stopping at each house for what looks like increasingly animated conversations. Her body language tells the story. Lots of pointing in my direction, dramatic gestures, and what appears to be a well-rehearsed performance designed to paint me as some kind of neighborhood threat. By noon, she's hit 16 houses, and I can already see the results. Neighbors who used to wave politely when I drove by are suddenly finding reasons to look the other way. The Hendersons, who live 2 houses down, actually turn around and walk back inside when they see me checking my mailbox. When neighbors avoid me, a feeling of loneliness envelops me. They say nothing, just cold looks. No one asks or communicates anymore. I thought about the first days when I was still part of this community. These silences really make me feel like an outsider, while I'm just trying to live by the law and do the right things. The social media campaign is more sophisticated than I expected. I don't use those platforms myself, but Mrs. Eleanor Campbell, the 72-year-old woman who lives across the street, fills me in during one of our porch conversations. "Dear," she says, settling into her rocking chair with a cup of tea, "that woman has been posting pictures of your ranch, claiming it's bringing down property values. She's got people all worked up about maintaining community standards and protecting their investments." Mrs. Campbell has lived here for 35 years and was my brother Tom's closest friend in the neighborhood. If anyone knows what's really going on, it's her. "She's done this before, you know," she adds quietly, glancing around to make sure no one's listening. That phrase stops me cold. Done what before? Mrs. Campbell sets down her teacup and leans forward like she's about to share state secrets. Run people out of the neighborhood. The Johnsons, lovely family with 2 little girls, lived in the blue house on Maple Street. Susan started the same campaign against them about 2 years ago. Same thing happened to the Lee family and the Martinez family. 3 families in 2 years, all forced out after Susan decided they didn't fit her vision. She pauses, studying my face. But here's the interesting part, dear. Susan somehow managed to buy all 3 of those properties for well below market value, then sold them again within 6 months for a nice profit. When Mrs. Eleanor told me about the families that Susan had driven away, I listened and felt like a knife was cutting into my heart. But I cannot let myself be confused. I have to act, have to find the truth, and if not, what she says will become part of the past. This information changes everything. Susan isn't just a power-hungry HOA busybody. She's running some kind of property manipulation scheme. I excuse myself and head to the county recorder's office, where public property records are available for anyone to review. It doesn't take long to piece together the pattern once you know what to look for. The Johnson house sold for $43,000 below market value. Susan Mitchell purchased it 2 weeks later. 3 months after that, She sold it for $68,000 more than she paid. The same pattern repeats with the other properties. Armed with this information, I start preparing for what I know will be Susan's next move. A formal attempt to pressure me out of the community. She can't legally force me to sell, but she can make life so unpleasant that leaving seems like the only option. That's exactly what happened to the other 3 families. The meeting notice arrives on Friday, scheduling a special session to address ongoing community disruption for the following Tuesday. The agenda is written in bureaucratic language, but the message is clear. They're going to try to formally censure me and create enough social pressure to make me want to leave. I spend the weekend putting together my counterattack. It's not enough to defend myself. I need to go on the offense and expose Susan's pattern of behavior. I create a simple timeline showing the harassment campaigns, the forced sales, and Susan's subsequent property purchases. The evidence is clear once you lay it out systematically, and I'm confident that reasonable people will see through her manipulation once they understand what's really happening. This isn't about HOA rules or community standards. It's about a systematic scheme to profit from driving people out of their homes. Tuesday evening, 41 of the 45 households show up for Susan's special meeting. That's the highest attendance anyone can remember, which tells me Susan's been working overtime to drum up support for whatever she's planning. She's arranged the community center like a courtroom, with herself at the front table, facing rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors. The lighting is dramatic, and she's even dressed more formally than usual, trying to project authority and legit. "Thank you all for coming to this important meeting," she begins, her voice taking on that fake formal tone again. "We're here to address a serious threat to our community's peace and prosperity." Susan launches into a presentation that would be impressive if it weren't complete fiction. She's prepared charts showing declining property values since my arrival, testimonials from concerned residents about my aggressive behavior, and a list of violations and disruptions that reads like a creative writing exercise. She claims I've been hostile to community standards, unresponsive to reasonable requests for compliance, and deliberately provocative in my interactions with residents. The performance is so over the top that I almost feel bad for her. Almost. When she finishes her presentation, she calls for a formal vote to request the removal of the disruptive resident for the good of the community. That's when I stand up, my folder of evidence in hand, and ask for permission to respond to the accusations. Susan clearly doesn't want to give me the floor, but proper meeting procedures require that I be allowed to present a defense. "Thank you," I say, walking to the front of the room. "I'd like to show you some information about property sales in this community over the past 3 years. I start with the timeline, showing how 3 families were systematically harassed, pressured to sell, and then had their properties purchased by Susan Mitchell for below-market prices. The room goes so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I present the facts simply and clearly, letting the evidence speak for itself. No lengthy explanations, no complicated financial analysis, just the basic pattern that anyone can understand. Harassment leads to forced sales lead to Susan's profit. When I'm done, the silence in the room is deafening. Neighbors are looking at each other with dawning realization, and Susan's face has gone from confident to panicked. She tries to interrupt, claiming the information is fabricated and irrelevant, but the damage is done. People are starting to ask questions, and Susan doesn't have good answers. When I see Susan talking to a man in a county truck, pointing at my ranch and shaking her head, I know tomorrow's going to be interesting. The county inspector arrives at 7:30 a.m. sharp, driving a white truck with official logos and carrying a clipboard that makes Susan's look like a toy. His name is Dave Morrison, according to his badge, and he has the tired look of a man who's seen every kind of building code violation imaginable. "Mr. Carter," he says, consulting his paperwork, "I've received a complaint about unpermitted structures and potential safety violations on this property. I am here to conduct an inspection and determine if any corrective action is necessary." I invite him in for coffee and ask to see the complaint that triggered his visit. The paperwork shows that Susan Mitchell filed a report claiming I'd been doing extensive unauthorized construction and creating potential hazards to community safety. Dave inspects the property, taking his time to confirm that everything is in order. When he's done, he shakes his head, confirming what I already knew. No violations here. "Mr. Carter, I've got to be honest with you. This complaint is complete nonsense. Everything I've seen is either routine maintenance or improvements that don't require permits. Whoever filed this report either doesn't understand construction codes or is deliberately wasting my time." He pauses, looking uncomfortable. But I still have to write up a formal report, and because someone filed the complaint, there's a $5,000 administrative fee for the inspection. Every time Susan stands in front of me, I feel like she's losing herself. Her eyes clearly show desperation, but she refuses to admit it. Every time she is cornered, Susan becomes even more stubborn, as if looking for a salvation that doesn't exist. That afternoon, I walk over to Mrs. Campbell's house for our usual porch conversation. But this time I'm looking for more than just neighborly chat. "Eleanor," I say, settling into the spare rocking chair, "I need to ask you about Susan Mitchell's role in the HOA. Specifically, about the finances." Mrs. Campbell's expression grows serious. "What do you want to know, dear?" I explain about the inspection fee and Susan's pattern of harassment, then ask the crucial question: who actually controls the HOA money, and where does it come from? Eleanor's answer hits me like a bolt of lightning. Well, everyone pays their monthly fees to Susan. Since she's the treasurer as well as the president, she handles all the administrative costs and sends us an annual report. But now that you mention it, I haven't seen one of those reports in over 18 months. The HOA financial records should be public documents, available to any community member who requests them. I call Susan directly and ask for copies of the last 2 years' worth of financial statements. Her response is immediate and telling. Those records are confidential and only available to board members. When I point out that homeowners have a legal right to review HOA finances, she hangs up on me. That's when I know I've hit the real nerve. Despite the tension, I don't let myself lose control. Years of experience at Boeing taught me that in situations like this, only precision and reason can make the right decisions. And I will not give up. I head to the courthouse, digging into the public records. It doesn't take long to uncover the truth. Over the past 18 months, Susan has collected approximately $30,000 in HOA fees from the 45 households in our community. The legitimate expenses for that same period should have totaled about $12,000. That leaves $18,000 unaccounted for, and I have a pretty good idea where it went. The evidence starts falling into place when I request basic information about the HOA account. What I find confirms my suspicions: regular withdrawals for administrative costs and management fees, totaling exactly $18,000 over 18 months. The withdrawals all go to something called Pine Valley Community Services, which sounds official until you realize it's probably just Susan's personal business. A quick check with the State Business Registration Office confirms that Pine Valley Community Services is registered to Susan Mitchell. Friday evening brings Susan's next escalation: a police report claiming I threatened and harassed her during our phone conversation about the financial records. Sheriff Hayes calls me directly, his voice carrying a mix of professionalism and barely contained frustration. "Bill, I've got to ask you about this conversation with Susan Mitchell. She's claiming you used threatening language and made her fear for her safety." I read him the exact words from my notebook, which documented our entire phone conversation. "Frank," I say, using his first name because we've developed a good rapport, "I asked for public documents that I'm legally entitled to see. She refused and hung up on me." That's the entire interaction. Hayes sighs. I figured as much. This is her 73rd complaint in 2 years, and so far, 0 of them have been legitimate. That's when Hayes drops the bombshell that changes everything. "Bill, I've been building a file on Susan Mitchell's activities, waiting for the right moment to act. Your situation might be exactly the catalyst I need. Would you be willing to cooperate with an official investigation into potential HOA fraud?" I don't hesitate for even a second. "Absolutely. What do you need from me?" Hayes explains that he's been documenting Susan's pattern of false police reports, but he needs evidence of financial wrongdoing to build a solid case. "If you can prove she's been stealing HOA money, I can arrest her for embezzlement and fraud, but I need rock-solid evidence that will hold up in court." When Hayes shows me a file labeled Susan Mitchell, Pattern of False Reports, I realize I'm not fighting this battle alone anymore. The file is thick, documenting years of harassment complaints against various residents, all of them proven false or exaggerated. Susan's been using the police as her personal enforcement arm, and Hayes has been keeping track. We spend the next hour going over my evidence and Hayes' documentation, building a timeline that shows Susan's escalating pattern of abuse. The property manipulation scheme, the financial irregularities, the false police reports, it's all connected. Susan isn't just a difficult neighbor. She's been running a systematic operation to control and profit from this community. And now, finally, someone with the authority to stop her is ready to act. The question is whether we can gather enough evidence before Susan realizes how close we are to exposing her entire operation. Monday morning, I exercise my legal right as a homeowner to request a formal audit of the HOA finances. The community bylaws are crystal clear on this point. Any resident can petition for a financial review if they suspect irregularities, and the HOA board cannot refuse without admitting there's something to hide. I hire Janet Peterson, a certified public accountant with 30 years of experience in nonprofit and community organization audits. She charges $200 for a basic review, money well spent if it exposes what I suspect has been happening with our community fees. Janet's preliminary findings arrive by email Wednesday afternoon, and they're even worse than I imagined. Over the past 18 months, Susan has systematically embezzled nearly $30,000 from the HOA account through fake vendor payments and inflated administrative fees. The landscaping contracts went to companies that don't exist. The snow removal services were supposedly provided by a business with no equipment and no employees. The community improvement projects never happened, but the money definitely disappeared. I couldn't believe my eyes when I looked at the numbers on the paper. Each number was like a slap in my face. The feeling of betrayal rose in me. I thought that everyone would do the right thing, that she would behave fairly. But now I know that the truth can be more cruel than I thought. Janet's report includes bank records, canceled checks, and a paper trail that reads like a textbook case of nonprofit fraud. The community's reaction to the audit results is swift and explosive. Mrs. Campbell helps me organize an emergency meeting for Thursday evening, and word spreads through the neighborhood like wildfire. 43 of the 45 households show up, including families who've never attended an HOA meeting before. The anger in the room is palpable as I present Janet's findings, complete with charts showing exactly where their money went. Everyone in this room has been paying monthly HOA fees to support community services, I explain, pointing to the financial timeline. What you've actually been doing is funding Susan Mitchell's personal bank account while she harassed your neighbors into selling their homes. Susan's response to the audit is pure desperation masked as righteous indignation. She arrives at the meeting with what she claims is her own independent financial review, which turns out to be a handwritten summary that contradicts the official bank records. These accusations are completely false, she declares, her voice shaking with either rage or panic. This man has been harassing me for weeks, and now he's trying to destroy my reputation with fabricated evidence. She waves around copies of bank statements that she's clearly altered. But the forgeries are so obvious that even non-accountants can spot the inconsistencies. When residents start asking specific questions about missing funds, Susan's story falls apart completely. The breaking point comes when Mrs. Campbell stands up and addresses the room directly. I've lived in this community for 35 years, she says, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's earned everyone's respect through decades of good citizenship. I've seen Susan Mitchell drive out 3 families with exactly the same tactics she's been using against Bill Carter. The Johnsons, the Lees, and the Martinez family all left under suspicious circumstances, and now we know why. She's been running a systematic scheme to steal our money while manipulating property values for her own profit. The room erupts in angry voices as neighbors realize the scope of Susan's betrayal. Sheriff Hayes chooses that moment to make his entrance, and the symbolism isn't lost on anyone. He's brought backup, another deputy I don't recognize, and they're both carrying official paperwork. "Susan Mitchell," Hayes announces, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and filing false police reports." Susan's reaction is immediate and spectacular. She starts screaming about illegal harassment and planted evidence, then tries to physically tear up the audit report, as if destroying the paperwork will make the bank records disappear. The deputy has to restrain her while Hayes reads the charges, and her meltdown is so complete that even her few remaining supporters look embarrassed. The formal arrest takes place in front of the entire community, with Susan handcuffed and led to the patrol car while neighbors watch from the community center doorway. Her final words before being loaded into the vehicle are almost comical in their desperation. "This isn't over. I have powerful friends. You'll all regret this." But the only people she's going to be talking to for the next several months are her court-appointed attorney and her cellmate. As the patrol car drives away, the community center falls silent except for the sound of 43 people trying to process what they've just witnessed. Mrs. Campbell breaks the silence with a simple observation. "Well, I suppose we'll need to elect a new HOA president." The immediate aftermath is a mixture of relief, embarrassment, and genuine community spirit. Neighbors who had been avoiding me for weeks approach with apologies and offers to help with the ranch. The Hendersons invite me over for dinner. The family with the teenage kids asks if I need help with yard work. Even the people who never spoke to me before Susan's campaign are suddenly friendly and welcoming. It's like the entire neighborhood has collectively exhaled after holding its breath for months. When I find a note on my windshield saying thank you for standing up to her, the community, I realize that sometimes fighting back against a bully doesn't just help you, it helps everyone. The emergency HOA meeting 3 days later draws the largest crowd in community history, with all 45 households represented and several people bringing spouses or adult children. The atmosphere is electric with anticipation, because everyone knows this isn't just about electing a new president. It's about deciding what kind of community we want to be moving forward. I arrive early to set up a presentation that I've been working on for the past 72 hours, complete with financial projections, community improvement proposals, and a new set of bylaws designed to prevent anyone from ever again wielding the kind of unchecked power that Susan abused. When Mrs. Eleanor talks about the 3 previous families, those names ring in my head like a warning bell. A feeling of anxiety rises. I wonder if I have enough evidence to win. Could Susan deceive people one more time? The meeting begins with Janet Peterson presenting her complete audit findings to the full community. The numbers are even more damning than her preliminary report suggested. Susan embezzled exactly $31,473 over 18 months, using a combination of fake vendor payments, inflated administrative fees, and outright theft from the Community Improvement Fund. The good news, Janet explains, is that all of this money can be recovered through the criminal restitution process. The bad news is that your community has been operating without proper financial oversight for nearly 2 years. She recommends implementing quarterly audits and requiring 2 signatures on all expenditures over $100. When the floor opens for nominations for the new HOA president, the room holds its breath. No one expected what happens next. Instead of the usual political maneuvering and campaign speeches, Mrs. Campbell stands up and makes a simple statement. I nominate Bill Carter. He's the only person here who had the courage to stand up to a bully, the intelligence to uncover fraud, and the integrity to put the community's interests ahead of his own comfort. The seconding comes immediately from 4 different people, and when the vote is taken, it's unanimous. 45 households, 45 votes, 0 opposition. I'm suddenly the president of an HOA that 6 months ago I didn't even know I belonged to. My first official act is to propose a complete overhaul of the community's financial management system. No more single-person control over bank accounts, no more administrative fees without detailed receipts, no more violation notices without photographic evidence and multiple witness signatures. The new bylaws I've drafted require transparency in all financial transactions, community input on major decisions, and a formal appeals process for anyone who feels they've been treated unfairly. The proposal passes 44-1, with only the Stevensons voting against it, because they're moving to Florida next month and don't want to deal with change. When I stood up and walked toward the front, my heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to burst. Everyone was following me, their eyes full of expectation. I held the photos and documents in my hands, feeling like I was holding a bomb. If I'm wrong, everything will collapse. The real surprise comes when Sheriff Hayes returns to address the community about the ongoing investigation into Susan's activities. What started as a simple fraud case has expanded significantly, he explains. Susan Mitchell wasn't working alone. We've discovered connections to a larger property manipulation scheme involving fake development companies and coordinated harassment campaigns in at least 6 other communities across the state. The FBI has taken over the investigation, and they're very interested in talking to anyone who was pressured to sell their property below market value. 3 families from neighboring HOAs contact the sheriff's office that same evening. 2 weeks later, Susan's sentencing hearing draws media attention from local news stations and real estate industry publications. The judge sentences her to 24 months in prison plus full restitution of the stolen funds, but the real punishment is the public exposure of her scheme. Her mugshot appears in newspapers across Colorado with headlines like HOA President Embezzles $30,000 and Property Scam Targets Rural Community. The story goes viral on social media platforms, turning Susan into a cautionary tale about unchecked power in small communities. Her few remaining supporters quietly distance themselves, and even her ex-husband issues a public statement denying any knowledge of her activities. The community healing process happens faster than anyone expected. Within a month of Susan's arrest, property values in Pine Valley actually increase as word spreads about our new transparent governance structure and strong community spirit. The silence in the meeting room was almost heavy, but then, From the corners of the room, I felt a shift. The neighbors who had previously avoided me now began to look at me with sympathy. The change in their eyes made me realize I was no longer alone in this fight. The Hendersons organize a neighborhood barbecue to welcome new residents and celebrate our fresh start. Mrs. Campbell starts a community garden in the common area that was previously Susan's private domain. The teenagers who used to avoid walking past certain houses now organize regular cleanup days and volunteer for elderly neighbors. It's like someone lifted a dark cloud that had been hanging over the entire community for years. My favorite moment comes during the first quarterly financial meeting under our new system. Janet Peterson presents a detailed budget showing exactly where every dollar of HOA fees goes, complete with receipts, vendor contracts, and photographic evidence of completed projects. The Community Improvement Fund, replenished by Susan's restitution payments, has enough money to resurface the main road, upgrade the community center, and install new playground equipment for the kids. When the presentation ends, the room erupts in applause, not for any individual accomplishment, but for the simple pleasure of living in a community where transparency and honesty are the norm rather than the exception. As the police car drives away, Mrs. Campbell whispers, "That poor woman never realized she was fighting someone who builds airplanes for a living." Susan's final court appearance takes place on a crisp October morning, 6 months after her arrest and 3 months into her prison sentence. The restitution hearing is supposed to be a formality, but Susan has apparently spent her time behind bars plotting one last desperate gambit to avoid full responsibility for her crimes. She's fired her court-appointed attorney and is representing herself, which turns out to be exactly as disastrous as you'd expect. Her argument to the judge is that she deserves compensation for improving community property values, and that her embezzlement was actually deferred payment for services rendered. The judge's response is swift and brutal. Full restitution plus an additional $10,000 in penalties for frivolous legal arguments and lack of remorse. The FBI investigation into the larger property manipulation scheme concludes with indictments against 12 individuals across 4 states, including Susan's ex-husband, who apparently wasn't as divorced from her activities as he claimed. The fake development companies were sophisticated operations that targeted rural communities with weak oversight and vulnerable populations. Susan's role was relatively small in the grand scheme, but her arrest provided the crucial evidence that brought down the entire network. Agent Sarah Martinez, who led the investigation, tells me that our documentation and community cooperation were instrumental in exposing fraud totaling over $2.3 million across 26 communities. After Susan was led away, a wave of relief spread throughout the room. The worn faces, the eyes that had once been evasive, now seemed to have found peace again. This community, despite going through so many upheavals, finally stood strong again, like an old tree that had weathered the storm. The recovery of our stolen HOA funds happens faster than anyone anticipated. By November, the community account has been restored to full balance, plus interest and penalties that give us the largest improvement budget in our history. The first project we tackle is resurfacing Pine Valley Road, which had been deteriorating for years while Susan diverted maintenance funds to her personal accounts. The second project is renovating the community center with new lighting, updated kitchen facilities, and a conference room that can accommodate all 45 households for future meetings. The third project is the one that means the most to me personally, a memorial garden honoring my brother Tom and the community spirit he always believed in. The Memorial Garden dedication takes place on a sunny Saturday in December, with the entire community gathered to honor Tom's memory and celebrate our new beginning. Mrs. Campbell gives a speech about Tom's vision for Pine Valley as a place where neighbors looked out for each other instead of tearing each other down. Sheriff Hayes attends off-duty to present me with a Community Service Award for exceptional courage in exposing fraud and protecting vulnerable residents. The local newspaper runs a feature story about our transformation, from HOA horror story to model community governance. And we start getting inquiries from other neighborhoods asking for advice on improving their own systems. When I stood there, watching people get along, I suddenly realized that I had changed. I am no longer just a son of Pine Valley, but a protector of the values we have forgotten in the past. Patience, precision, and justice are not something far away, but what I have devoted all my heart and soul to rebuilding. The unexpected opportunity comes in January, when I receive a letter from Pine Ridge Community, a development about 2 hours north of us. Their HOA president has been using tactics eerily similar to Susan's: harassment campaigns, suspicious financial management, and a pattern of residents being pressured to sell below market value. "We've heard about what you accomplished in Pine Valley," the letter reads, "and we're hoping you might be willing to share your experience with our community. We're facing a similar situation and don't know where to turn for help." I discussed the request with Mrs. Campbell over our usual porch conversation, and her advice is characteristically direct. "Tom always said retirement would be boring. Seems like you found a way to make it meaningful instead." My decision to help the Pine Ridge community isn't difficult. Fighting Susan taught me that bullies thrive in isolation and silence, but they crumble when faced with organized resistance and transparent accountability. I contact Agent Martinez to discuss the FBI's Community Education Program, which provides resources for identifying and preventing HOA fraud. I also reach out to Janet Peterson about developing a standardized audit system that could be implemented in communities across the state. The idea of turning our painful experience into a tool for protecting other neighborhoods feels like the perfect way to honor both Tom's memory and the community's spirit that sustained us through our darkest moments. The Pine Ridge consultation turns into something much larger than I expected. Within 6 months, I'm working with community organizations across Colorado to implement transparency reforms and fraud prevention measures. The Pine Valley model becomes shorthand for HOA governance that prioritizes accountability over authority and community building over individual power. Mrs. Campbell jokes that I've accidentally become a professional troublemaker, but the truth is simpler. I've found a purpose that combines my engineering background with the community values that Tom instilled in me. Fighting one corrupt HOA president turned into a mission to protect communities from the kind of abuse that destroys neighborhoods and hurts innocent families. The perfect ending comes on a warm evening in May, exactly 1 year after Susan's arrest, when the community gathers for our first annual Pine Valley Day celebration. The event combines a neighborhood barbecue, financial transparency meeting, and recognition ceremony for community volunteers. Children are playing on the new playground equipment, teenagers are organizing a charity car wash, and adults are planning collaborative projects for the coming year. When we sat on the porch, Mrs. Eleanor looked at me and smiled gently. "Tom would be proud of you, son. He said you were the smartest kid in the house. You proved it." Her words were like a soothing word, helping me feel that not only I had won, but this whole community. Mrs. Campbell and I sit on the community center porch, watching the festivities and reflecting on how much has changed since that day when Susan Mitchell called the cops on a man moving into his own ranch. "Tom's watching, you know," Eleanor says, pointing up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, "probably laughing at how you handled that woman. He always said his little brother was the smart one. Sometimes the fight finds you when you least expect it, but experience, patience, and good old-fashioned common sense can beat any bully, especially when they're dumb enough to put their crimes in writing."
This story might be over, but QA Stories has a whole vault of mayhem waiting. Choose your next rabbit hole wisely.